Going back to the event that can be considered as the center of queer history, many in the LGBTQIA+ community know Stonewall as the legend it is, but not for the event it was. This historical riot changed the face of the gay rights movement across the world. The 1960s and preceding decades were not really welcoming times for the LGBTQ+ community in America. For instance, solicitation of same-sex relations was illegal in New York City. It is important to understand that violence and discrimination in all forms against the LGBTQ+ citizens was the drawing force behind the evolution of the Stonewall movement.
It was, in a sense, a safe place. You could put your arm around someone, you could kiss someone, you could hold hands, you could dance with someone. That was all very important those days because LGBT people were invisible.
They suffered injuries on the streets, discrimination in the workplace, in the courtroom, and were lacking any legal protections. For such reasons, individuals from the community flocked to gay bars and clubs that acted as a place of refuge where they could express themselves openly and socialize without worry. The Stonewall Inn, a gay bar located in New York City's Greenwich Village, quickly became a safe haven for the LGBTQ+ individuals in the 1960s.
At first it was just a gay men's bar, and they didn't allow no women in. And then they started allowing women in, and then they let drag queens in. I was one of the first drag queens to go to that place.
It was large and relatively cheap to enter, welcomed drag queens, and was a nightly home for many runaways and homeless gay youths. Police raids on gay bars were common, but on one particular night, members of the city's LGBTQ+ community decided to fight back, sparking an uprising that would launch a new era of resistance and revolution.
During the early 1960s, New York Mayor Robert F. Wagner Jr. led a harsh campaign to shut down the gay bars of New York. Gay bars were often raided by police. If cops showed up, white lights came on to tell everyone to stop any illicit behaviour. Patrons were lined up and asked to produce identification. Any men dressed as women, as the police saw it, were taken to the bathroom to have their gender verified. Women required a certain amount of women's clothes to be acceptable. Cross-dressers and those without ID would be arrested.
On the Tuesday before the riots began, the police conducted an evening raid on the Stonewall Inn, arresting some of its employees and confiscating its stash of illegal liquor on the pretext of operating without a proper liquor license.
Raids usually happened earlier in the night, so when the lights came on at 1:20 a.m, the 200-ish patrons were taken by surprise. There was no fire escape, so the front door was the only door in or out. As people were being lined up, those dressed as women were refusing to go into the bathroom, and people began refusing to produce identification. People were getting more agitated as police began to abuse some lesbians they were searching. Those who weren't arrested were kicked out onto the street, but this night they didn't leave.
After midnight on an unseasonably hot Friday night, the Stonewall was packed when the Stonewall Inn was raided by police without any warning. In addition to the bar's employees, they also singled out drag queens and other cross-dressing patrons for arrest. In no time, more NYPD officers arrived on foot and in 3 patrol cars.
A crowd began to gather in front of the Stonewall, the police still waiting for more patrol wagons to show up. Some bystanders began mocking the police, and many cheered as the mafia bosses were being carried out. But as the police hauled out some of the patrons, people became more angry.
Outside, Siegel and others began to form a semicircle in front of the Stonewall's door. As the police made arrests inside, the crowd grew by the dozens and eventually outnumbered the police and employees still left inside the bar.
According to witness reports, the crowd erupted after the police roughed up a woman dressed in masculine attire. believed by some to be the lesbian activist Stormy DeLarvery. People taunted the officers, yelled pigs and copper and threw pennies at them, followed by bottles and slashing of the tires of police vehicles. Finally, sometime after 4 a.m., things settled down and the first night of rioting came to an end.
As the crowd was initially dispersed, some people came to a construction site where there were piles of bricks, so new projectiles were thrown, forcing the police to retreat. Many of these people were the most downtrodden of the community, and they were angry. Police reinforcements of the Tactical Patrol Force arrived and formed a phalanx to push down Christopher Street. The crowd formed a chorus line and mockingly kicked at the police, singing as they went. The police beat them with batons, but it only angered the crowd more. The police were vastly outnumbered by the crowd and were ultimately driven back for the night. Several protesters had been hospitalized and 13 arrested. 4 police officers were injured.
Over the next several nights, gay activists continued to gather near the Stonewall to use the moment to spread information and build the community, which was to fuel the growth and steer the direction of the gay rights activism. It was seen as the birth of a movement. The legacy of Stonewall is just as important as the event.
Over 100 police arrived that evening, but as the night went on, the Tactical Patrol Force arrived again, and more street violence ensued. But once more, the protesters held their ground.
The Stonewall Riots shaped the lives of many people who experienced it as their lived reality and had seen what led up to this landmark event.
We're going to stop at these benches over here. This was my bed. This is my living room. So this is where I came when I was 13 years old. It was 1962, 63. You know, and when I first hit here, I was so fucking scared. This was Gay Alley. We were all out here, all kids. It would range from like 20 to maybe 30, 40, 50 lesbian and gay boys out here, drag queens, transsexuals. I definitely felt like I had a family, which I never felt before.
The emotions reflected on the faces of the people as they talked of what Stonewall was and the emotions it held for them.
My best friend called me and told me, I found a gay bar and they allow you to dance with men. That was the Stonewall.
The interior of the bar was horrific. I mean, they didn't have running water. So no one ordered, if you knew, no one ordered a drink in a glass. But it was ours, I mean, so who cared what it looked like?
And it was always crowded, you know, always crowded. Like you'd see queer people outside, but walking into the bars and seeing so many of us, you know, it was like, yeah, you know, like it was home.
What made Stonewall a landmark event was people's thought, we are going to be who we are, which changed the entire journey henceforth.
What made the Stonewall Uprising really different was that 2 weeks later, the Gay Liberation Front sent out a notice that they were organizing. We don't care if straight people accept us. We're going to be who we are, and if you don't like who we are, just get out of our way. We came up with the idea of a Pride March. We called it the Christopher Street Liberation Day March.
An effort by 2 people who the world still looks at with awe and gratitude, Stonewall was the first step towards a history of concerted work for the gay community as they were termed then.
Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Ray Rivera planted the seeds that took so long to grow and take root. They were there in the front lines. And it was just so incredible that there were people who stood back, like embarrassed We are not one of you.
The movement has come a long way since then to fight not just for rights due to the people, but also to establish a space where they are accepted for who they are and are allowed the space to exist the way they wish.
Intersex surgeries! End intersex surgeries! Mic check! We're intersex and here to stay! We're intersex and here to stay! You can't make us go away! You can't make us go away!
We cannot allow future generations to live with this indignity! We have a duty to fight and we have a duty to win! End intersex surgery!
We did that action today. People showed up. People showed out.
We will be erased!
Part of it is that they can't envision us living with a non-binary body in a binary world. And you know what? That's on all of us to change.
But a society that offers equal opportunity is still far removed from the reality. Employment opportunities, social equality, and unconditional support and respect remain goals that are yet to be achieved.
60% of the trans community doesn't have an employment. We don't have access to housing. We don't have documents to live in this country. There is a lot of hate crimes. I want my community to feel safe. And that's the reason why I do this type of work.
The present is not where it all ends though. The journey has only just started, with the walk being long and the present serving to be the basis for the future in the same way that Stonewall is the foundation for it all.
People that are going to come in the future are going to need our words and need our experiences, just like we needed those words and experiences and truths from those who came before us.
In 1970, on the first anniversary of the Stonewall, several hundred demonstrators marched along Greenwich Village's Christopher Street, which runs past the Stonewall, in what came to be known as the first Gay Pride March. The Stonewall Riots became one of the earliest incidents in the history of the LGBT community to have an effect that was immediate and continues to last even today. The momentum this incident had was unlike any seen earlier. Considered to be the single most important event, Stonewall is seen even today as the pioneering incident that allowed the people of the states to come and voice their opinions and find a space where their identities would be accepted despite the legal machineries and every institution of the country working against them. This was a place where the unified could protest and fight against a system that regularly ensured that their voices had been silenced till then. The immediate impact of the Stonewall Riots could be seen and felt in the United States of America. The event became a systematic beginning for the LGBTQ+ movement, with new organizations forming themselves, people putting out their opinions more pronouncedly. But this was the beginning of a long-drawn process which saw several hurdles and many delays before bringing about actual changes. Outside the USA, Stonewall Riots were equally important and marked the start of many organizations that worked for the rights of the LGBTQ+ community. It served to be an inspiration throughout the globe, with many countries following in its footsteps and getting an orderly movement. One of the most discussed events in the history of the LGBTQ+ movement, the legacy of Stonewall Riots is still alive, and its spirit celebrated every year to pay homage to the people who began the journey for many people to come. The consequences of the events, while many, when seen through the lens of the community, have positive effects, unlike any other event. Sexuality and gender identities began to form a part of mainstream deliberation. Years after, the Stonewall Riots remain in our hearts and our minds and form an integral part of our spirit and the endless struggle the community has engaged in. As Rivera said, it's the revolution, and the truth of these words ring even today. To continue to hold the burning lamp for the future generations to come, to create a society that is, in essence, an equal society.